A Lone Star bishop is taking aim at Rome's upcoming synod and shooting down the notion that women can be ordained deacons. Join us with the latest from the Eternal City, Church Militant Rome correspondent, Dr. Jules Gomes. Jules, our favorite home bishop from Tyler, Texas, is once again standing up for the deposit of faith as it's being tossed about or bandied about in Rome, this time on the doctrine of female ordinations. Tell us about it.
Brad, Bishop Joseph Strickland of Tyler, Texas, wrote a very powerful pastoral letter. One of his strongest so far, published on Tuesday on his website. And basically what he does is he drills deep down into fundamental Catholic theology that seems to have been lost, over the last 60 years. He talks about the uniqueness of Jesus, the definitiveness of Jesus for salvation. He goes on to talk about the uniqueness of the Catholic Church, its sacred role, and then he warns against the Synod on Synodality, proposing anti-Catholic doctrines like the ordination of women deacons.
Yeah, as you see him in the video there, he was out at the Dodgers protest there, talking with us out there. It was a couple months ago. What exactly, and he really gets around, he stands up for the faith everywhere. What exactly did he say here about female deacons?
Now, this is very interesting because there are actually 3 or 4 long paragraphs that he covers very carefully. He is anticipating the development, quote unquote, where liberals could say that, we'll have a category of women, so-called deacons, but they won't be ordained, and then be allowed to transition to the priesthood. So he preempts this kind of scenario, and he tells us that in sacred scripture, Christ ordained only men as his apostles, his bishops, his priests. Sacred tradition, the magisterium of the church continues that, and the church has no authority whatsoever to ordain women to the priesthood. He says this cannot be changed because Jesus himself ordained a male priesthood, because the bridegroom is the church, and the church is the bride, and the bridegroom is Christ. He uses that analogy. He quotes St. John Paul II, Ordinatio Sacerdotalis, where Pope John Paul II himself said, I declare that the church has no authority whatsoever to confer priestly ordination on women. And then, again, develops a very interesting argument, almost from a feminist perspective, saying that, Christ wouldn't have wanted a lesser role for women in his church. So, God has called them to be mothers, inasmuch as God has called men to be fathers. So let's not confuse the two. We have got the greatest women in the Catholic Church, the Blessed Virgin Mary. How higher can one go? And then, finally, he talks about the potential for female deacons in the Catholic Church. Yes, women did serve as faithful servants, diakonos, in the early church, and this is the objection he's preempting, but they were never ordained and never part of this threefold ministry of diakonos, presbyteros, and episkopos.
Now, Jules, from your perspective there in Rome, and also in his own words, why did Strickland specifically now, why did he bring up this topic on female deacons?
There's been a lot of push for some kind of, they're using all sorts of coded language. And the coded language is women's ministry. The real push, Brad, in the Synod on Synodality is for women priests. And if they get women deacons, they simply won't stop there. We know this from the Church of England, for example. And the feminists in the church are not willing to stop at female deacons. They've said that repeatedly because, again, they would consider that as patronizing and a lesser role in the church. It's all about power for them. And so Strickland is shooting this down right at the start. the call for women deacons, incidentally, has also been, or the call for coded women's ministry has been echoed by top synodal leaders like Sister Natalie Becker. In fact, just yesterday or today, she reiterated this call.
Yeah, and in his pastoral letter, he says, reportedly the Synod on Synodality will be discussing this this next month. So he wanted to get out ahead of that. Seems like the church leaders like to keep blurring lines, Jules. One line is about the so-called female deacons in the Bible. You touched on that. How does Strickland clarify that? Specifically that he grants the fact that there was a type of deacon called servant deacon in the Bible, but that's not what we're talking about here with ordination of deacons, are we?
Absolutely. And I got real clarity on this when talking to a confessional Lutheran minister, a conservative in Rome recently. And he explained to me that his particular brand of Lutheranism recognized this, and so has women deacons, but they cannot perform any sacramental role. In fact, they cannot even preach. They are there as servants, because Jesus wants all of us to be servants, to serve. And this is the kind of ministry of deaconess which is described in the New Testament. Strickland recognizes that, and he warns that the liberals will use this and try to use it as a Trojan horse to claim that these women were ordained and part of the threefold sacramental ministry of the church, which they never were.
Yeah, because if you have full immersion baptism back then, it would just be appropriate for a woman to be helping another woman in that, in an adult baptism there, and you would have the diakonos was just a word in Greek that meant servant. So she was helping out in that role, a very necessary role just for modesty and propriety's sake, and that being part of that baptismal proceedings there. But she was not ordained to had anyone laid hands on her, ordained her, such as they had other deacons in the Acts of the Apostles. Now, another line that gets blurred, Jules, is the half-baked theologians say the church only bans women priests, but deacons are a whole different animal altogether. How does that jive in Catholic theology?
Well, they get this from Pope John Paul II, who, as we've just read, issued a very strong statement banning women from becoming priests. But it's very clear there he means the priestly ministry. A priest is used as a word covering the threefold ministry. And, it's like saying, well, he did not mention, not having a woman pope. So we can have a woman pope or women bishops, which is really, bordering on the ridiculous. And there is no, way in scripture, tradition, or the magisterium where that leaves any loophole open for the ordination of women deacons.
Yeah, like St. Thomas was talking about the 3 degrees of the priesthood, deepening of the character of ordination and so forth happens. You ordained at deacon, and that character deepens with priesthood, and then it deepens again to the fullness of the priesthood, which is the bishopric. Jules, 2 years ago, Pope Francis actually started a commission to investigate this whole matter once again of women deacons. Whatever became of that, and how many times does the church have to close the door on ordaining women?
Well, that's a very good question, because in April 2020, we did a story on Pope Francis appointing this commission of 10 people. There were 2 priests, 2 permanent deacons, 3 priests, 5 women theologians. And interestingly, Francis actually stacked the deck, if we can call it that, in favor of people who were against the ordination of women as deacons. Most on this commission are conservatives, and there were people, the liberals, who fiercely criticized this. What Pope Francis said that an earlier commission, apparently in 2016 that had been appointed to clarify the role of women deacons had not done its job properly, in terms of what we were just talking about, the role of deaconesses in the early church. And so he expected this commission to look at it and come to a conclusion and make proposals. But there's been dead silence from this commission ever since it was constituted. And now, without hearing anything from this commission, which consists of really, really good theologians, top-notch scholars, practitioners in the field, people who are committed to the church. We've heard nothing from them, but then this issue is becoming really a hot potato at the Synod on synodality.
I just wonder, a little prognosticating, if this is not going to go the way of the same-sex couples, where, no, you don't allow them to have a marriage ceremony, but then you have some blessing of the couple. I wonder if they're going to have some type of reusage of the word deaconess, and with some, blessing ceremony and commissioning thing that's not amounting to ordination, but then that kind of is a smokescreen. The rest of the world sees it as that. So, well, it'll be interesting to see how all this rolls out. But the most pastoral words in Strickland's letter from Tuesday is his words that although the church is holy, she is also made up of sinful members, and some of those members wear mitres. So never leave the church owing to some of its unholy members. Jules, thank you so much for bringing us a good news story about a holy bishop.
Thank you, Brad.